Okay, Joe is trying to get himself logged in. And while we're waiting, since it is noon, maybe we could kick things off. I'll just give you guys a brief introduction, and then Lauren's going to take the show over, and we're going to hear from our panelists. So let me start my video. That would be really helpful for you guys to see me. Hi, I'm Leah Wasser. I am the Director of Earth Analytics Education here at Earth Lab. And I'm really excited that you guys are all able to come today. This is part of a series of webinars that are focused on Earth data science. And I just noticed, I'm going to spotlight. That's myself. That's awkward. So this is a part of a series of webinars on Earth data science that's funded through the National Science Foundation HDR, Harnessing the Data Revolution Data Science course. So it's a grant, it's a 3-year grant, and we're going to be doing more of these webinars over the next couple years. So stay tuned for that. And this specific series is focused on career development. So tackling some of those challenges of how do you find a job in this field. And we've got some great panelists with us today that Lauren will introduce you to in just a moment that will be talking about their experiences searching for jobs. And we've got a degree or a gradient of people from those that really recently graduated and are still in the search process to someone that's actually had multiple jobs and is more advanced in their career to talk to you about their experiences. And what we want you guys to do is think about if you have questions for these panelists. And I'm going to just show you, I'm going to share my screen just for a minute to show you how this is going to work. So this is, one moment, the tool that you can use to submit questions, because sometimes it's hard when there's 40 people on Zoom and you want to ask a question. The way that you can do it is by using this link. So you can go to menti.com, and if you want to just open that up on your phone now, you can just have it open while people are talking. And you type in this code, and it will take you to the screen, and you can see I've already added a test question there. When you type in that code, what you're actually going to see is something that looks like my screen here. And so if I want to ask a question, I can submit it, and I can also see if there's a question I like, and I can give it a thumbs up. And what we're going to do is, as we see questions with multiple thumbs up, we'll share those with our panelists. But this is the way you would submit your question. And then you can see other questions and vote for them. If you were going to ask the same question, then we don't have the same question in there twice. So again, the way you get to this screen is you just go to menti.com and you use this code. And I'll put this in the chat just so it's there as well. And we'll be monitoring the chat as well. But without further ado, thank you guys for being here, and I'll let Lauren take over. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Leah. That is great. So thank you all so much for being here, and especially thanks to our 4 panelists who we are so excited to have. As Leah mentioned, they are all, with the exception of Joe, so I should probably say their names first. It's Gina Lee, Will Norris, Martha Morrissey, and Joe McGlinchey, and everyone has been part of Earth Lab at some point. And with the exception of Joe, the other 3 actually have the awesome perspective of recently having gotten their first Earth data science job within the past few years. So they are very privy to what it's like to get that entry-level job, which is, I think most of us agree, one of the hardest ones to get, and one of the more stressful job searches. I don't know, I haven't done too many, but I would say that one was the worst. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves for 2 to 3 minutes, and just any nuggets about their job search. But like Leah said, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be asking them questions too. But yeah, Gina, Martha, and Will, and Joe, if you could just give an introduction of who you are and your background, and maybe the most important things that you learned from the job search, but knowing that you'll get the chance to elaborate more. So whoever wants to go first. I see Gina, you're unmuted.
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Leah and Lauren. So as they mentioned, I was part of Earth Lab. I was a grad student in the geography department from 2017 to 2019, working with Colleen Reed. I did do 2 semesters of a research assistantship at Earth Lab. So that was great. And so I'm kind of wrapping up 1 year at Descartes Labs, which is, I guess, a Earth data analytics company. And my role there is geospatial data engineer. So basically, I work on ingesting data for a platform so that users, end users, can access analysis-ready data from various Earth data sources like satellite imagery, DEMs, elevation data, weather, climate, data reanalyses, things like that. The question was, sorry, about the job search, right? Sort of was it the challenge, or sorry, could you repeat the
It was
question?
not succinct at all. You're totally good. Just what the biggest nuggets you learned from getting your Descartes job were.
Yeah. So I would say I think sort of every job search is different. This one was interesting because I applied on. I mean, nowadays everything is apply online, right? So I did sort of apply online through their website. I had heard about them through just being in the field of geospatial data, knowing that they're one of the names out there. And then there were several rounds of interviews. I think the idea here was, I think the biggest nugget of knowledge was just try to apply to as many companies that pique your interest as possible. Obviously, be smart about it because there's only so much time that you have, of course. But yeah, definitely apply to as many that seem interesting to you, and take initiative. Definitely be on top of replying to any recruiters that respond to you. I can definitely get into more detail, but I think that was sort of the biggest thing, sort of being relentless and taking initiative to apply to as many as possible. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay. Will, you're next on my screen if you want to go next.
Cool. Sounds good. So, hey everyone, I'm Will, and I did my undergrad at CU, and I got hired at Earth Lab as an intern, doing predicting snowpack metrics. So kind of like a big data analytics, geospatial data problems, with Carson Farmer at first, and then I started working with the analytics hub. Um, and I interned there for a year and a half, and then worked there for another year about. And now I'm currently doing freelance database admin and developing APIs for a few different companies. And when it came to trying to decide what I wanted to do when I left Earth Lab, I ultimately wanted a little bit of freedom this year. And so I did interview at a few companies and had a couple different offers, one at Descartes actually, like Gina, and then one at Google and one at Apple later this year. But I ended up kind of building this network of smaller companies that needed databases built, needed a dev to come in and deploy certain applications they were working on into the cloud. And freelance work is pretty fun. It involves a lot of kind of stepping into a company that you're not very familiar with, learning how they use their data, and designing them a database that organizes it in a way that makes sense, a way that's fast and efficient for their workflow, and keeps it safe. And so when it comes to searching for a job, I found personal projects came up a lot, and having a few different personal projects that I've been working on pertaining to big data was really helpful. It seemed like every time I was able to show a recruiter or an interviewer that I was really interested in what they wanted to work on, outside of getting paid to do it, they were really excited about that. And so having some projects that, aren't necessarily like a class project, aren't just something that is like a tutorial online, something that you kind of came up with and you can, work on these with friends. That was really helpful for me. And Yeah, so as far as like the job search goes, and I can get into more specifics um, when we are asking questions, but showing that like personal interest in what the company is doing was so critical for me. And I found that as soon as I uh, showed them that like I was really excited about this kind of work, working with large data sets, bringing information that can be mined from data to an end user, really got people excited. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Will. And Earth Data Science course students then take note. So what he's saying is that the applied project portion is helpful for being able to actually show employers that you can do real world stuff. So that's great to hear, Will. All right, Martha, I see you next on my screen. Oh, are you able to unmute yourself? I thought I gave you the privileges, sorry. All right, let's see here. You can find it. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Now can you? Did that work?
I think we're good now.
Now I hear you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Martha Morsi, and currently I'm working at Development Seed as a machine learning engineer. And before that, for about a year and a half, I was at Digital Globe, which is now called Maxar, as a data scientist. And before that, I was getting my master's degree at CU Boulder from 2016 to 2018. And before that, I got an undergraduate degree in geography. And in terms of the job search, I would definitely say internships are a really great way to get your foot in the door and really like leverage that. My internship at Maxar transitioned really nicely into a full-time opportunity there. And then for when I transitioned into Development Seed, when I was looking, I was really selective about where I was looking. And it was also nice, this obviously isn't applicable for your first job, but I had like a lot of flexibility to find a new role, and I could be really selective and find something I was really passionate about. And it definitely shows through when you're interviewing. There wasn't kind of a crunch of like, oh, I'm graduating in May and I really want to have something lined up before then. I could kind of have a relaxed timeline. But again, I understand that's not applicable for if it's like your first job. But it does get better after your first job, so hang in there. And then if it's possible, kind of figure out what companies you're interested in now and start to engage with them, especially if they have open source code. Like if you can use the code and build something with it, or if you can open an issue or even contribute to it, that's really useful, and it's helping the open source community. And like even if you're engaging like months before you apply to the job, that's great, because that shows you're really interested. You don't suddenly develop this interest like a week after you submit your job application. That's okay too, but it's more genuine the other way around. But yeah, just kind of getting engaged with products or workflows a company has out that are open source and kind of staying up to date on their blog is really good to do.
Thank you so much, Martha. Yeah, that's great. So staying in touch with exactly what they do and doing your homework. That's great. Okay, Joe. Oh, do you? I thought I gave you. It's weird with the superpowers. Okay, there we go. Did that work?
Yeah, that worked. Thank you. I wasn't muted before, but I muted myself and couldn't undo it. So thank you for thank you for doing that. Yeah, thanks to the education team for the invitation to this. I think this is a pretty cool topic for a webinar and very beneficial to everyone. So my name's Joe McGlinchey. I'm a remote sensing scientist with the Analytics Hub at the Earth Lab. So I've interacted with the other 3 members of this panel at some point during their time at Earth Lab, so it's nice to see you all again. My background is a little bit different. I came through my undergrad in engineering, actually, so electrical engineering, and then graduate school in the field of imaging science, which was kind of a niche program at Rochester Institute of Technology in Western New York. But they had a very heavy remote sensing focus, both on the instrumentation and detector side, but also on the data analysis side, which is kind of where I focused. I'm looking more at environmental systems with hyperspectral and LiDAR data, And that gave me the experience and subject matter expertise to, at least on paper, appear attractive to employers. And I ended up finding a very good job with Esri, who makes a commercial GIS software package called ArcGIS, and worked within their consulting division, their professional services division, as an imagery scientist. So focusing on basically any customer contract they had who wanted to do spatial analysis with their data, with their remote sensing data specifically, since at that point in time, Esri's offering for remote sensing type analyses was not the strongest. It has definitely improved over time, but that was, geez, almost like 7 or 8 years ago now. So over the course of time working at Esri, at a place like Esri anyways, if you're working in the geospatial community, you kind of get in touch with different sectors of that community. And like Martha had said, once you have a job in that community, you're kind of in a better place to look for something that maybe as you grow in your career, maybe the fit's not as good as when you first started, and you kind of know what you're looking for. So having the flexibility within a job and also the knowledge of what you're looking for helps with that job search. As far as looking for your first job coming out of the education world, right, in your degree program, I would echo pretty much everything that everyone else has said. But I would also like to add that if you go to conferences, I think that's probably a really good way to network with companies that are there. They would be, exhibiting their product for one thing, but you can at least start the conversation with those groups and kind of understand what they do. And having like a business card of sorts or some way to provide your information to that group so they know your name, I think is a good way to lay some groundwork, at least as you're looking for jobs and then while you're applying.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, Joe's got a lot of experience at big name Esri. I think a lot of people have heard of Esri and whatnot, so that's cool to have your perspective for sure. So I see we've got a lot of questions. And Leah, did you want to tell us the top ones or? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Worried about the mute thing.
I think I can unmute myself. I have superpowers. Yay. Yeah, there's some great questions in here and you guys are voting. So I put it in the chat, the link. If you have other questions, you can add them or use the thumbs up. But the first one was, and some of you guys hit this, but let's just go over it again because the most voted question is, what are your tips for those just starting out? And I know you had a few already, but let's maybe the one thing for someone starting that you think is the most important or that comes to your mind first. Let's hear that from each of our panelists.
I can start. I would definitely like to reiterate the conference idea, right? So there are, within this field, I feel like there's many different types of conferences that focus on different sectors in the geospatial community, and there's going to be, they're all very interesting, right? So it's just a matter of finding the funding to do it. But I think it's very worth it to go to those types of events and network, get to know the community a little bit, get to know the professional community a little bit. And in line with that, if you're just networking, that's one thing. But if you're actually looking for a job, getting your resume to like really highlight the different things you've done in terms of like Earth data science or things that are applicable to that particular employer, I think are beneficial too. So, I think conferences for networking, and then also having work on your resume are two important points.
I can go next. I'd say those are really great suggestions. And two things I want to add are, if you have like a research project, if you're coming out of grad school that you spent a few years working on, or if you're coming out of the Earth Data Analytics program and you have like your applied project, be really ready to talk about it and talk about it to the different audiences that are going to interview you, because during the interview process, you are going to be talking to people that are more or less technical. So just make sure you kind of have crafted your 2-minute summary or however long it is of what you've done and how you can apply those skills to that specific company. And also, most companies could ask you for a code sample, so just have that ready to go. Like, you don't want to be frantically pulling that together at the last minute. Just kind of like, as you keep your resume up to date, make sure you have a code sample up to date, because as you move through, like, your skills are only going to get better. So just make sure it's kind of reflecting like where you're currently at in your like technical journey.
Yeah, to
Yeah, sort of
echo,
to
sorry,
go ahead,
go
Will.
ahead. Just to echo what Martha said, like having like a portfolio website or your GitHub organized with your projects on there, and with a nice README that kind of explains why you built this, and having code online where you can show it to people, and also really practicing how to explain technical topics to someone who might not be an engineer themselves. Like, a lot of times your first interaction with the company is going to be someone who is not a data scientist and maybe not a software engineer, and being able to tell them why you built this and why you think it's important goes a long way. And I think that that definitely gets people interested when they see that you're thinking kind of big picture, not just that traditional engineer, like, I built this to make this little process that I do but really could just do manually automated because it's fun, but because like I built this to automate this because it makes people's lives easier, or some kind of concrete reason why you think that working on this project is important and informational. I think that helps a lot.
I think Will and I started off the same way, which was to echo what everyone was saying. And I totally agree. I think having your resume sort of in tip-top shape, and also having that like 2-minute speech or README ready to go when you're applying to jobs is really important, because I think you have to remember, these applications need to be pretty efficient and like right to the point. So another thing I would offer is, yes, like conferences are great to like sort of understand what you're interested in, but once you're actually applying to something, you should keep in mind, is this sort of like data science position? Is it more of a software engineering position? Is it, whatever it may be, make sure you're catering your resume and the things you have ready to talk about to be specific to that role, so that, you have specific experiences and specific skill sets, specific classes that you've taken that can really sort of support your position and being fit for the role. So I would say have things prepared, but also just be smart about how you're applying and know your audience, as everyone has said. I think that's pretty important.
I thought of one more thing I want to add. If you could do practice interviews with a friend or anyone, or if anyone on this call needs help, I'm happy to help do practice interviews with people. I know Gina and I did that for each other, and it was incredibly beneficial. Yeah.
So true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the practice interview, and definitely knowing the answer to the question, tell me about yourself, because that's always 99% of the time is going to be the first interview question. And just get it, like, being able to, yeah, because there's like 5 to 10 questions that, at least in non-technical interviews, that you're always going to get. So that's a great point. All right. Next question.
So the next one that has the most votes, so again, if you guys missed it, go to menti.com and the code is in the chat. But the next question has to do with approaches and skills. So how much do high-level programming applications such as machine learning and AI influence the Earth data science industry? So is that something that people should be learning or working on to get jobs, is how I'm translating that question.
Yeah, I think it's very important in this day and age to at least be familiar with it, with machine learning and AI techniques as it's applied to geospatial data. Pretty much every software-based company I can think of is looking at that, right? So think about the Esris, the Envies, the Erdas's, everyone has a capability to leverage AI techniques within their software because it's all the buzz, right? So knowing how that is applied to spatial data, I think is very beneficial in knowing the pros and cons to that, or at least being able to talk about it and understand that you may need to, like, there is no blanket solution, right? So being able to understand the problem, how to research the problem, and how to evaluate the results of those techniques applied to that problem, I think are probably, to me anyways, the more beneficial parts of that conversation, and not just saying yes or no. It's the answer, right? So I think being able to talk to those points and come at the problem from a stepping back type perspective and saying, okay, does this problem fit an AI solution or does it not? Because there's still a lot of, I think, traditional remote sensing and analytic methods that are applied across the board to solve spatial problems.
I definitely agree with everything that Joe said. And something I also want to add is that as this is becoming more common in the Earth data and geospatial industry, like you might not want to be a machine learning engineer, and that's totally fine. That's definitely like a direction you can go in. But even if you're a software engineer, like you could perhaps be working with like inputs or outputs to machine learning models. So just kind of like having an understanding is really helpful. And since Development Seed does kind of a lot of, we're like a services company, so you can kind of think of it as technical consulting. We kind of always have conversations with clients, our partners, about what the most appropriate solution is, and just being able to talk through the pros and cons of an ML-based solution is like really crucial and something we do all the time. And a lot of people are kind of still coming at us and they think ML is magical and it's going to solve everything for them, and that is certainly not true.
Yeah, I remember reading an article last month that said PyTorch is one of the fastest growing desirable skills for a new data scientist. And having some understanding of how like basic ML techniques work can be really, really useful. Even like working as a software engineer, I think a lot of people, especially working in Python, you might end up implementing some kind of basic machine learning in one way or another. You know, you don't necessarily have to be training deep learning neural networks, but just having an understanding of how to implement some basic machine learning models that may or may not make something you're working on more efficient or more effective, and being able to kind of assess whether or not going the machine learning route is actually worth it, because sometimes people get really excited about implementing some kind of ML technique, and then they go and realize it's using more time, it's more memory intensive, like it's not actually improving their workflow. And so I've seen that a lot in some of the smaller companies I've been working with. But being able to kind of talk through that, I think, is really helpful. And so, you know, picking a language, whether it be Python or R, I recommend Python, and gaining an understanding of how at least one kind of major platform works, whether it be PyTorch or Keras, and you know, maybe you don't necessarily have to be fluent in TensorFlow, which is kind of a scary black box, to be able to be a part of the conversation. Yeah.
I think it's also important to realize that there's not like one geospatial analyst job out there where you have to have like, you know, certain finite number of skills and applications. Like, for example, like within Descartes Labs, within like the people that have tech jobs, you know, we have applied scientists, we have geospatial data engineers like me, we have software engineers. So, you know, I'm not necessarily working with creating models on a day-to-day basis. I'm essentially ingesting data for the company. So I work with things like building pipelines and scaling compute resources and things like that. But at the same time, someone like me, for example, who's in charge of getting data, we might, you know, work with sensor fusion, for example, which would require knowledge of machine learning and statistics. So I would encourage you to ask yourself like what you're most interested in, and then from there sort of pave a way for which role you're interested in, and then sort of shape the skills and knowledge that you have to fit that role.
Great, thank you guys. And panelists, just know that if a topic or question is such that you're like, oh, it's already been answered, you don't have to answer each one, but it's great if you do answer each one. Just know that no one is forced into answering every single question. So the next question that has a lot of votes, Menti.com, if you have questions, is can you provide some examples of personal machine learning projects that could be done with a small amount of compute, like that of Google Colab? So I'm guessing that question is in the space of, I don't have access to cloud compute and a great, highly with with a computer with a lot of resources. What can I do to implement some kind of smaller scale machine learning project that might demonstrate I'm capable for a position?
Real quick, are we able to see these the questions on Menti, or is it just
I
Good
can't see
question.
them.
Let me share my screen. If that would be helpful, I'm happy to just keep it up. I just didn't know if that would be distracting. But
You can also log in yourselves and put the code in, and you'll be able to see the votes. But this works too.
Is that
oh,
helpful?
okay. I think I see them.
Also, too, if you follow the link that Leah's put in the chat, and then you click on the Ask a Question button, they all pop up, and you can see them. You don't actually have to ask one if you don't want to, but you can see all the questions there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so that would look something like this, what Nate was just describing.
And
Wonderful.
you could click on the recent box and choose the top, and then it'll show you also if you're kind of curious as to what, because this is obviously in real time, so people are still voting while, questions are being asked.
I guess on that question of like an example of personal machine learning projects, my friends and I, for a little over a year now, have been working on something that create a tool for the long distance backpacking community. And essentially, like a big problem that comes up a lot of times with backpacking is you want to hike like 100 miles, but there's not a lot of like 100-mile long trails. Or at least, when you get on hikingproject.com and you look up a trail, it's all going to be a bunch of short ones that make up this giant network. And what we did was scrape their database and build an online tool for creating optimal like routes based on a user's location and how far they want to hike and how far they're willing to drive. And when it comes to training like ML models, you need a lot of compute when the data size gets really large. And so if you can kind of find a problem where you can train a model that's not necessarily on a data set that's super massive. So like when I was working at EarthLab, my data set was closer to 10 terabytes. And when I needed to process something with that, I needed a lot of compute power. But when I'm working with all of these trails, trail data is really simple. My database is like 2 gigabytes large. And so when I spin up like an instance on GCP, which Google Cloud Platform, if you have a Gmail, they'll give you $300 free of credits that you can use on any of their instances. And as far as I know, you can keep making accounts as long as you're willing to redeploy your code to a new GCP account. And that gives you a lot of leeway to play around and train a model on something that you may not know if it works, or you're interested in it to see if it does work. And some stuff can also be trained on your computer if it's not huge. So I think kind of finding a project that is something you're personally interested in. I've also done a few different machine learning projects with natural language processing with Twitter data. Twitter's API is free to use and pretty easy to use. So finding something like that can go a long way to kind of getting your hands in there, because following tutorials is great. But when you're actually kind of shaping the problem and the question yourself, I think you can learn a lot. And GCP, Google Cloud Platform, if I didn't make that clear.
I can add some stuff to the Google component. Within EarthLab, we just finished up, there's a group of us that just finished up a group learning exercise through the Fast AI course. And that is, Fast AI is a Python framework that sits on top of PyTorch, which kind of, it tries to like abstract away a lot of the PyTorch inner workings and make it easier to use, which in some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. But throughout the course, at least, they have a lot of examples where you can download data and apply models that already exist. So as far as like getting your feet wet on like classic data sets like ImageNet or MNIST or things like that, it makes it very easy and low cost of entry, I think, to access that data and kind of get some experience at least using those models. And they have it set up so that you can do everything in Google Colab, which is a Jupyter-like environment where you can work with notebooks and have all the compute resources there, use GPUs, do the training. So I think that's a pretty useful way for anyone, I think, who's not totally well versed in the deep learning frameworks to get experience with at least one and be able to access that data pretty easily and reasonably if they don't have the resources, the hardware to do it.
And also, just to add one more thing, some of my friends keep telling me about this website called vast.ai, which is VAST.ai. And it's their slogan is democratizing AI. And so it's a GPU sharing economy. And my friends have been using that a lot to spin up really cheap GPUs. You can get access to someone's two 2080 Ti's for however many hours you want for usually like 40 cents an hour. And if you have kind of an idea of what you want to do, that platform has been pretty cool for us to get access to more CUDA cores without actually just throwing money at AWS.
Also, kind of a shameless plug here for Descartes Labs, but we do have something called the Impact Science Program at Descartes Labs, which is essentially, it's like 2 rounds of, researchers can apply to gain access to our platform where you can run machine learning models and other type of large scale analyses using our compute resources. Usually that's something that needs to be paid for, but if you apply as a student or a researcher, that's something that we consider as well. I can post, I believe this was the Medium post that originally came out when we first announced it. So that's in the chat for anyone who is able to look at that. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. And I guess you can reach out to me if you have any questions as well.
If you're looking for freely available satellite data that comes curated with labels, there's the SpaceNet challenge. And I think there's a new one starting pretty soon and you can win money. And SpaceNet for different, they have, I think we're on SpaceNet 6, but the challenges involve routing with roads, identifying roads from satellite imagery, and also identifying buildings from satellite imagery. So you could look into that, but those are quite large data sets, but you could always play around with a small subset locally, and then when you feel ready, scale up and use your free GCP credits or something.
And in terms of data as well, Kaggle competitions, whether or not you do the competition or not, can be a really great way to get a hold of some data to work with for various purposes, and can be a pretty fun way to learn how to train models. So, and a lot of times in interviews, I get asked if I've done Kaggle competitions, and you can kind of pull it up and show them what you did and your thought process behind those challenges, which is, they can be pretty fun. So.
Awesome. Thank you guys. That was great. And there's some links that are being added in the chat if you guys haven't been following that as well. If you wanted any of the links that everyone just mentioned, I think most of them, if not all of them, are in the chat. The next question is a slight change of direction. Can you remind us which of you went to grad school and how necessary is grad school to get a job, to get a good job? I get asked this question a lot. So whoever wants to answer first, take it away.
This is just my opinion. I'm sure everyone will have something different to say, but and not to sort of sound like a broken record here again, but it does depend on what that position is. I'd say if you're probably leaning toward machine learning, it probably does at least benefit / help to have a graduate degree. If you're doing more sort of software engineering, I'd say a lot of people that I know in those positions just have a bachelor's. At the end of the day, you know, if you're nailing the technical interview, I think the good thing about this field, I think, is like a lot of it is just being able to perform the role. But yeah, I'd say it depends. I think it definitely helped me in my position. So yeah, I guess I'll let other people add to that.
I think I'm the only one here that doesn't have a graduate degree. And personally, I still don't know what I want to get my grad degree in. And since I have quite a lot of experience working with the technologies that I'm trying to use in my work, I haven't necessarily found it needed at this point in time. I'm still, and a lot of companies I've talked to will pay for part of your grad degree. So I'm almost done with Google's interviewing process, and they've mentioned quite a few times that they'll pay for half of my graduate degree online through either Stanford or Berkeley. And you do that while you're working, which I imagine can be pretty stressful. But I think that it's a broad field, you know, whether you wanted to get a degree in applied statistics or software engineering or data science, there's a lot of different programs you can go into. And personally, at this point in time, I don't necessarily know which one I would want to do. So I think if I had picked right out of undergrad, I would have gone into some sort of data science related program. But now I would lean more towards a statistics master's degree. So I don't necessarily think you have to have one. I was plenty competitive in all of the companies I applied for, but I think having kind of that tenacity to show them that you really want to work with this, with the technologies that they're using in the job field is important, and maybe more important than your schooling. And if you can kind of nail the technical interview and that's where the personal projects, you can, you know, talk them through your thought process, show them that you have the critical thinking capability to work through more complex problems, find solutions to problems you don't know the answers to already. I think that's maybe more important than your degree, but there certainly are positions, especially if you're just applying at the front door, where having that degree is going to get you past the person who just looks at resumes and passes them off to the recruiters. Whereas if you are working on connections and have the opportunity to talk to these companies more in depth, they may not require a graduate degree. So it kind of depends.
Yeah, the answer definitely is it depends, and it's kind of the unfortunate answer, right? It's like not the clear answer, but yeah, I think on paper, a graduate degree definitely makes you more attractive to the position, but I think it also very much depends on the experience that you do have going into it. So for me, I did not have the type of experience on my resume, for example, from my undergraduate degree compared to when I had it with my master's degree. Like, it's totally different. So depending on your field of study in your undergrad, you know, if you have any projects or internships that kind of really can set you apart, I think, from someone who didn't do that and just went through the coursework. I think a lot of it really just comes down to experience and technical experience. And a master's degree and further can help with that. for sure. But yeah, I think you can do a lot these days without a graduate degree. That's my opinion.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. That was a great one. And I'm just going through the questions that have the most votes. So if you see one you like, feel free to upvote it. So the next one has to do with COVID and our current situation. Should we have any additional worries about the job market pertaining to data science given COVID? Have any of you witnessed a slowdown in hiring in the last few months?
I think again, it depends on what industry you're looking at. But this is also something that's completely out of our control. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Like we cannot control this. Development Seed has still hired. It just kind of depends on what companies you're looking for. There's definitely companies out there that are still hiring. So don't be too discouraged.
I've seen it both ways. Some companies that have a lot of user-focused platforms like Apple and Google are actually in a hiring push right now because their platforms are under stress. People are at home using their software a lot more. And all of a sudden, the personal computers we work with every day, not necessarily our work computers, have become a lot more important. And so I've seen that get a lot of extra attention. But other companies that work with are maybe a little more corporate centered, working with corporate data, maybe are slower because a lot of different clients don't have as much going on right now. And so I had one opportunity fall through because of COVID and a couple more come up probably because of COVID as well. And I think working more than ever now, you got to work those online connections more than ever. And that's where I think like building a nice portfolio website where you can show a little more than your resume is more useful than ever, because more people have been hitting my LinkedIn than I've ever had people hitting my LinkedIn. And when I can redirect them to something I've built with more information, I think it kind of helps push you along. And so, yeah, I would say up and down.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. The next question. So our questions are still pouring in. Feel free to vote. But the next one that has a bunch of votes is, how do you start your own personal project? So how can you take your passion for something and take it to that next level and develop a project? If you're, I'm guessing, I'm translating a little bit here, someone that's, kind of on their own or just in school and they want to do, Will, what you're talking about, where do they start?
I know for me, like the first step is always where's the data? And so like you can't really do a lot without having data to show people, because that's a lot of times what people are interested in. And so like when we started working on our like backpacking trip generator, which isn't live right now, but because we tore down the servers yesterday and are putting them back up in AWS instead of GCP. The first question was like, how do we aggregate trail information to people? And REI and their hiking project website has GPS data for all, like most trails in America. And so we started by just writing a simple request script to scrape all of their data from their database into our own. And so like, if you're interested in some particular topic, the first step is to try and figure out where you can get some data, see how clean that data is. And a lot of times, like whether or not, if that data is clean enough to use, then you can start to kind of formulate what it's going to be. Our project started as just a command line script to query local files and run the Python solver in the background. And it's kind of evolved into a serverless database, an API service, and a front-end website with a graphical interface for people to use. And so we've, and I'm working on that just with some friends from college. We're all working different jobs now, but we work on that on our own time. And so I think that there's a lot of different places where you could build a personal project. It's hard to come up with just like examples on the spot, but even analyzing like Twitter data or satellite data can kind of like, once you start working with it, sometimes it leads you into an idea for like a real project.
I would say start with the question you want to answer, how you want to implement it, and then from there, like Will said, like, you know, get the data. Then from there, you can, you know, choose a platform like the Descartes Labs API or the Planet API, Google Earth Engine. There's a lot of APIs and platforms available out there to process Earth data. And then, you know, even though we said like this is not the end goal for the employers, but, you know, if you want to get started, then follow some tutorials. I'd say that's probably the best way to get started. And then also, while you're doing all of that, keep in mind sort of the dev tools that are sort of important nowadays, like, you know, getting set up with GitHub, GCP tools, AWS. Yeah, that would be the starting point, in my opinion. That's Docker as well.
Yeah, I think it's just having the inquisitive mind, right? So if you are thinking about problems that could be solved, and you can think about it in a way that says, okay, so if I had data to solve that, like, well, what would I do? I think that's like a pretty important first step to that. Kind of to piggyback on Will's project that he's working on in his free time, the backpacking thing, right? So it's like, oh man, I'm curious about where there's maybe viable water sources, right? So maybe you think about that, like, how would I find that? I'm gonna go and try and find some satellite imagery that would clue into where there's moisture in the scene, right? So you can kind of cross-reference with that, with maybe your own personal experiences of being on a certain trail, and he's just using that information to try to create some information. So I think really what it comes down to is, you know, I want this information, I don't have it, how can I get it? And being able to identify the source data and maybe some of the workflows that would lead you there.
Yeah, just real quick on that note, like what Joe was saying, if you ever find yourself asking a question like that, I wish I knew where there were nearby water sources, or like, that is a great way to start working on a project, like a real life problem that you've experienced, and they don't have to be big. And a lot of times that can kind of grow into something that you're actually building a tool, which is pretty fun. But just like a concrete question is a good way to start.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we've got 5 minutes left. This has gone really fast, and there's a lot of good questions. There's probably about 15 questions left. Let's take the last 4 minutes to allow all of our speakers to just, if you have any last tidbit of information for this group, maybe take a minute or less to just provide that, and then we'll wrap things up. And then after this webinar, we'll try to get to the rest of the questions, maybe in a blog format, so that some of those other questions get answered. We just won't have time to answer them today. So if anyone would like to start with just a quick wrap up, tidbit of information for folks to take away from today. And And maybe with Gina, would you feel comfortable starting?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. I'm just like trying to think of something succinct. Yeah. So I think one thing to take away is, try very hard to not develop imposter syndrome. I feel like even with this talk, we have thrown around a bunch of terms and maybe some tools that maybe not everyone is familiar with. I remember my very first project, and I wish I still had the domain name up and running. Maybe Martha, you remember it. It was like a map I created. It was like every county of the United States, a clickable map where you could look up like the historic high temperature in the last 5 years. And there would be like a pop-up window and a little charts from like high charts JavaScript API. And so there was like a lot of working parts to this. There was like a backend PostGIS system that was publishing data to the map, and there was like some other base maps. Anyway, there was a lot of stuff going on. I just want to say, like, if you're starting off on a project, again, start with a question, how you want to answer it, and just start Googling maybe like very basic things. How do I add a base map layer to my web map? How do I then, get this data set from whatever source? Like, start slow, just ask questions. Don't be afraid to, take maybe a small project and present that to an employer if that's all you have. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're all still learning. I feel like in my job, I'm learning every day, even though I've been here for about a year. So, and don't be afraid to also reach out to me. I'll sort of put my contact here in the chat below if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Gina. I'm just going to go in order here. So Martha, you're below Gina.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say engage with the open source community. I think that would be a good use of your time, and definitely to echo what Gina said, everyone is still learning, even if it seems like they know what they're doing. They probably don't.
Thank you, Martha. Will.
Yeah, so I think mentioning imposter syndrome is a really good thing to talk about, just because something my friends and I are always talking about is there's always so much to learn, it feels like. And that can be really stressful, feeling like you need to understand how all of these different technologies work together. That's why teams exist. Not everyone can be an expert at every technology. And so if you need to use Docker for a project, gaining a functional understanding of that, and then moving on to the next topic, don't pressure yourself to be an expert at everything you do, because it's just not possible. It's a really broad field. And diving into any topic can be really useful. And so, yeah, I definitely would say, like, there will always be someone who is better at what you're trying to do in a very specific niche sense. But that doesn't mean what you're doing is not like meaningful in some way. And everyone is constantly learning. So it definitely can feel really easy to walk into a room like at a conference full of engineers that seem like they're way smarter than you. But they might not be quite as skilled at certain things that you're good at doing. Or, as long as you're willing to learn, that's most jobs. Like, what you're going to do is learn a lot, and I think they definitely expect that. So if you can show them that you want to learn and you're capable of it, that's the most important thing. Not necessarily coming into it knowing everything already, because that's just not possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Joe.
Yeah, knowing how to learn and knowing what you don't know, I think, are two very important things. Yeah, I can remember being in a job interview, and then all of a sudden a question came up saying, okay, so we're actually looking for somebody that knows synthetic aperture radar really well. What do you know about that? And I was like, well, I'm probably not your person then. So like, just like knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, and knowing that you can always improve, through training, workshops, education, knowing that you're not going to be locked into what you know now. You're going to be able to improve your skill set as you are working. I mean, that's been constantly learning and improving for me ever since departing from grad school and working. I think that's the most important thing to realize, is that you're going to build a very good skill set through the program you're in, and you're going to be able to improve on that through your professional career. Yeah, like everyone else here, I'm going to pop my email into the chat, so feel free to reach out with any questions.
Awesome. Well, we are just at 1 o'clock. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. Oh, we can't do a round of applause. We're muted. I will thank
Martha
all the
wrap up?
speakers.
Sorry.
We can do a virtual Zoom emoji round of applause. Thank you guys for coming today. And just know that we'll have webinars throughout the summer over the next couple months, so you can stay tuned if you want to check out some of our other webinars. Lauren, did you want to say anything as well?
I think we're good. I got confused. I was like, did Martha wrap up? But you did.
I wanted to say one thing, which is that you can save
Thank
the
you.
chat. So those of you that maybe were like frantically trying to copy links and email addresses, if you have the chat open on the bottom right, you'll see 3 little dots, and you can click on that, and there's an option to save the chat. So when you close out the Zoom session, it'll actually show you where a text file has been saved with everything that's been put in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Well, that's all that we have for today. So thank you guys, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Will, Joe, Gina, and Martha for spending time to talk to everyone today. It was really informative. We had a lot of great feedback. And then keep in touch for other Earth Lab events. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a
That was
good
good.
week.